Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to invite you to another alumni webinar. Today, Crystal's joining us, and she's going to tell us how it was for us working together. So, Crystal, tell me how we first met and how you heard about my work, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So I found you through Amy Johnson and her little school of big change, which was one of the many things that I found and tried in order to address, excuse me, all kinds of physical issues and the anxiety that I saw is coming from all of those issues. So I heard you speak in the Little School of Big Change about pain and the mind-body connection in regards to the three principles, and really resonated with me. So I reached out, and I'm very glad that I did.
And so what was the specific pain that you were experiencing at that time?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I have had, kind of across the board, just widespread fibromyalgia kind of pain, but really specifically digestive issues were a big thing for me. Headaches, really, I mean, just migrating symptoms kind of head to toe.
Right, right. And so what kind of things were you trying to fix it before that, like methods or
Oh my
techniques?
gosh. I had tried everything. I mean, initially, I went to 5,000 doctors,
Right,
everywhere across
right.
the country, and
And
all kinds of,
did they ever tell you what was wrong? Did they ever give you a diagnosis?
well, so really all of my symptoms have been diagnosed as functional issues,
Wow.
so no organic disease or,
Mhm.
structural abnormalities. My,
Right.
my digestive condition is called gastroparesis. It's a functional disorder, idiopathic, they don't know
Mhm.
why anybody ends up with it. The pain was diagnosed as, fibromyalgia. I was diagnosed having hypermobility, just
Mm.
they put names to them, but it, really just named my symptoms
Right.
basically. So um, not really super helpful. I mean, I went so far as for my digestive problems. I have a device implanted in my stomach to alleviate, not necessarily get rid of, but the nausea that was
Wow.
associated with gastroparesis for a long time, and that's been off for a couple of years now. But um, just, I mean, all kinds of things from traditional medical treatment to, kind of average things like acupuncture, but then more, I don't want to, more alternative things like,
Right.
crystals and people who look in your eyes and like, look at your irises and see, what
Right. I
nutrients
did
you
that
need.
too.
And
Iridology.
yeah,
Yes,
so
I did that.
yes, across the board, really. I mean, I feel I tried retreats, for all kinds of spiritual retreats and healing retreats and just, oils and diets and all the things.
Right. Yeah. So what was it stopping you from doing, like, in your life? Like, how was it the symptoms, how were they affecting your lifestyle at that time?
So it's almost hard to remember because I mean, I have had symptoms since I was a child,
Wow.
so I can't really remember like a period of my life where I was not having physical symptoms where, there was a change really,
Right.
because, I remember having physical symptoms from the time I was in grade school.
Wow.
And what I've really come to see through this though is that it was never really for me, I don't think, the physical symptoms stopping me from thriving. It was really all of the anxiety
Mm.
and thinking that I had around those physical symptoms that really like made my life very, very small. I mean, I got to a place where I was afraid to leave the house, but I was also afraid to be home alone. So, that's a very specific set of circumstances
Yeah.
where you're okay.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it really, I mean, I did things. I went to college and got married and had a baby. Um, but the constant anxiety was just always there over my physical symptoms and what did they mean and what was going to happen with them? Were they going to go away? Just constant all the time.
Right. So what do you think changed that kind of helped you to look for something new, something different? What was going on that because I was the same way. I was like looking out here all the time, and then suddenly finding something that was more like what we call inside out. What was
Yeah.
going on?
The first time I really heard about the three principles and this inside out way of thinking was a couple of years ago through Dr. Amy Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that the anxiety was a piece of it, just kind of intuitively.
Right.
I knew that it was at least wasn't making things any easier. And, I started suffering with panic attacks multiple times a day. I was having panic attacks. And so that became something you can't ignore, because
Right.
multiple times a day you're having full-blown panic attacks. So I started listening to podcasts about anxiety, trying to, understand it. And Amy was on one of those podcasts, and she was talking about anxiety in a very different way than I had heard people talk about it. She wasn't talking about it as a disease or, a imbalance or any of these things. She was talking about it as a misunderstanding, which I remember being like, oh no, like, I'm not like, no, you are misunderstanding, like clearly. But there was something in it that just made me look deeper. And so I started just exploring and reading, and I read one of her books, and I got into the Little School of Big Change. And that was kind of like the first step for me, like thinking about it almost like a pyramid, like up here, I really started to see that my thinking was my experience. And I wasn't experiencing the pain or the digestive symptoms, I was really experiencing my thinking about them. And that brought a lot of relief. And for a long time, that's kind of where I sat. And there was still a lot of anxiety underneath that, but that was such a relief that for a while that felt good enough for me. And through working with you, I went down, another level, I think, on that pyramid, to just find like a deeper grounding and more peace underneath all of that.
And so what would you say are some of the insights that like when we were talking, I know you had some really amazing insights. So is there anything you can share that you found that really kind of opened up the door to sort of seeing your physical condition in any better or easier way, or that was helping to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. The first thing we talked a lot about was mind and the idea of being held by something greater than me, which, as someone who didn't grow up with religion, that it wasn't something that I had looked a lot at or thought a lot about. And so it really, I think, it just made everything I had learned about thinking sink in a little bit deeper in a way that allowed me to just release some of the anxiety. The thinking for me is a way of control, and so knowing that, I don't have to go down that thinking, and like knowing all of that is one thing. But when we were talking about mind and I really started to understand it, the need for that control that I think, my thinking is my safety, from that control perspective, that fell away a little bit because I didn't feel that same need to be in control. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what came to me.
No, I think that's a really valuable point, because a lot of people I've worked with and a lot of people out there are suffering from like what we call health anxiety now. And yes, I noticed that anxiety, I know when I was experiencing that kind of torturous thinking, it was because I can really see how much I was relying on myself. Yes. I had this tiny little funny insight yesterday when someone, we were talking about Einstein. Like I could not tell you what Einstein's, even the equation, MC equals something. I know it's something like that, right? See, I'm just so not a scientist, and I could not explain to you, his theory of relativity. But one of his very famous quotes, which is that you cannot solve a problem that from the same level of consciousness that created it. That I get, right? That's the Einstein theory that I really get, because like you just kind of described, if thinking is causing my circumstance, my experience of my circumstances, and thinking is causing that agitation and that anxiety, then thinking about it more isn't going to fix it. So there isn't a solution at the end of more thinking, which is what I always thought. I thought if I think about this enough, then I'll work out the problem, or I'll work out a plan, or what to do, or who to talk to, which, and so I think that's why this conversation about mind, or it could be God, could be a higher power, could be like Sid called it, the source of everything, the intelligence of the universe, is so valuable to people with health anxiety, because like you said, that feeling of being held and feeling safe, then it reduces our need to be anxious. Did you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that was really valuable when we were talking was seeing that we are part of that. So it's not, you used, the waves in the ocean, I think, when we were talking about it. And so, thinking about this universal intelligence, and we have access to that made a lot of sense to me. And that brought a lot of comfort, in a way that if I have access to that, then I don't have to necessarily do this constant checking. Am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay?
Right.
Because there's obviously, if I have access to this intelligence, I'm going to just know if at some point I'm not okay. And I had heard people say that before, but I really think with things like this, it's you don't really hear it until you do. I mean, you hear it,
Yeah.
but you don't feel it, until you do. And that was a really big one for me. And I think the other really big one for me, when I got real sloppy on our call, crying and emotional, was really around death. And I think for a lot of people with health anxiety, that's kind of the big fear, right? That's why we don't want to get sick, or I never understood why people would be afraid of like getting a cold or something, because it's like, so what, you're going to recover, but like a stroke, like that's, and it had never ever occurred to me until we were talking that day, that my thinking around death, that it was, I think I used the term the big bad wolf when we were talking, that was also a thought, that was something my mind had made up, and I had just believed as 100% truth. Like the worst thing that could ever happen was to die, like worse than anything else and anything. That was just the worst. And I remember, like, as we were talking, just it occurring to me, that's a thought. Like, I made that up. I have no idea if that's true. And that really shifted things for me. I think in conjunction with our conversation about mind, I think those two things really together were really significant in terms of the health anxiety specifically, because those two things, thinking I was in control to make sure I didn't die, basically, at every second of the day. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And so, those two insights were just really, really huge. In not necessarily in like an outside way, that anything necessarily changed on the outside, but in a very inside way, and where I've just felt a lot more peaceful. Right. Without trying, not like, okay, let me remember those insights so that I can feel, just walking around throughout my day, there's just like this little sense of peace that wasn't there before, which sounds simple, but is huge, huge.
Wow. That is so nice. And I think it's so helpful for other people to hear, because when you're in that place of anxiety, I know when I was in my lowest places, I couldn't conceive of anything being different than how it was. Like, clearly you didn't have it as bad as me, because if you could get free of it, then you really didn't have what, I had to put up with, what pain I was experiencing, what torture my life was. So I think it's really helpful to hear someone like you talk about that this is what it was like, and now you don't have to live like that. So just to finish up, how are you feeling now? How have you been in the last week since we finished talking?
Good. I've been feeling good. And it's not that, I haven't had any physical symptoms. I think I'm paying less attention to my physical symptoms
Hmm.
because, of
Hmm.
everything we've just talked about. I feel less of a need to monitor them
Right.
constantly.
Yeah.
One of my big symptoms that I didn't talk about is heart palpitations and, heart arrhythmia.
Hmm.
Again, nobody's ever been able to find a reason for it.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I wear a watch
Uh-huh.
so I could constantly check my heart rate. I mean, that was a big part of it,
Yeah.
to like make sure my heart rate was okay. And I've noticed just in the last week, since we've been talking or two, that I almost, don't even think about it. I don't think to check, and it'll occur to me and I'll check or I won't. Um, but, simple things like that throughout the day would keep me primed for that
Yeah.
anxious thinking because, oh, I
Yeah.
got to check, I got to make sure. And that's all outside of me. So then how I feel is
Yeah.
based on what my watch says, my heart rate was.
Right.
Like, how silly is that? And so just little things like that are really contributing, I think, to a much more peaceful,
Hmm.
day-to-day life at this point.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming and giving up your time to come and share this with other people. I think it's going to be really helpful. So I wish you continued success and continued peace, and we'll be in touch soon. All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.